Some breaking news on the president's attempt to deploy National Guard troops to Portland, Oregon. CNN law enforcement correspondent Whitney Wild is with us now. Whitney, what more do we know about this?
Well, there is a major victory for the Trump administration. They had sought to appeal this temporary restraining order that limited the National Guard's ability to be deployed in Portland. Originally, a district court judge had, as I said, put a restraining order on that, attempted to extend it. The Trump administration appealed, and for now, they are celebrating a major victory because this appeals court, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the three-judge panel who oversaw this case, has put a stay on that district court judge's order, which means that the Trump administration can deploy the National Guard troops to Portland to protect that ICE facility. This is an important win, again, for the Trump administration, but it is also significant when you look at the totality of how the judiciary around the country may look at similar cases. The Ninth Circuit is widely considered a more liberal circuit. The courts on the West Coast are largely considered more liberal courts. And so for the Ninth Circuit to give the Trump administration this win, that will put quite a bit of wind in their sails, Pamela, because they are facing other similar lawsuits in other districts throughout the country. One of the points that was made in the majority opinion here, it appears to suggest that there's a lack of assistance or maybe not enough assistance from the Portland Police Department. And as they are looking at the totality of the Trump administration's claims, the totality of a potential risk here, it appears that they do think that the Trump administration will likely win on appeal. And the reason I bring up the Portland assistance is because here in Chicago, the help from local law enforcement was one of the reasons that a judge issued a temporary restraining order on the National Guard being deployed in Chicago. And the point here, Pamela, is that as the judiciary looks at all of the factors here, what is the real risk to an ICE facility? What is the real responsibility for law enforcement in this area to protect them? They are considering the assistance they're getting from local law enforcement in deciding whether or not the National Guard is warranted here. And so, again, this is a major victory for the Trump administration. Our team is combing through this order now, as well as the dissent, to try to get, bring you the most detail about the reasoning here. This is a 57-page order in the majority. The dissent was another 36 pages, so we're still combing through all of that. But Pamela, in the short term, this means that the Trump administration can deploy the National Guard to that ICE facility in Portland. Back to you.
All right, Whitney Wild, bringing us the latest on that. Thank you so much. And that ruling in Oregon comes just days after the No Kings protest that took place across the country this past weekend. And one of the issues for some of the protesters was this idea of sending the National Guard into cities. And we've heard President Trump dismiss them just today, calling them, quote, small. But according to the organizers, 7 million people took to the streets Saturday to protest and what organizers describe as President Trump's, quote, authoritarian agenda. There were more than 2,000 rallies held across the country. Speaker Johnson characterizing these protests in a similar way and tying them to the ongoing government shutdown.
Now that Democrats have had their protest and publicity stunts, I just pray that they come to their senses and end this shutdown and reopen the government this week. Republicans are waiting, the American people are waiting, and we are ready to act.
All right, our panel is back here. We're also joined by retired Major General Randy Manner, the former acting vice chief of the National Guard. First of all, I'd like to go to you, Randy, on just this latest development that we just heard from Whitney Wild on the appeals court allowing the National Guard to go to that ICE facility in Portland, Oregon. What do you think?
I think it's very unfortunate anytime we have American troops in American cities for made-up reasons. I think it's something where if the administration is limiting those troops to only ICE facilities, that is still a small and major victory that the National Guardsmen cannot go anywhere that they want. So reluctantly, of course, the court has spoken, and therefore the National Guard will follow the legal orders of the administration.
It's interesting, just again, this crossover of the executive branch and the judicial branch on these really big, high stakes decisions that are unprecedented, right?
Really unprecedented. And what this came down to is this question of whether the federal government is unable to execute the laws of the United States without the intervention of the National Guard. Now, the argument that the lower court had made was that, well, of course, these are protests happening. They might impede, they might slow down the work of the government, but the government's deporting more people than ever before. They're doing just a fine job of carrying out their orders without the National Guard. So the appeals court here seemed to say, and we haven't looked fully through it, it just came out a second ago, but the appeals court seemed to say, well, no, this is getting in the way of the government's ability to do its job. That language, unable to execute its functions, is going to come up again, whether it's at the Supreme Court or whether it's with an appeal to the full Ninth Circuit, all 11 judges, which I think parties will almost certainly do. I think there's an open legal question still, but yeah.
I want to bring you in, Doug, because as I mentioned earlier, this idea of sending the National Guard into states against the will of the governors in these states, it's something that has galvanized some of the protesters that were out there in the No Kings protest, right? There was 7 million people around that, according to the organizers, and they were there. I mean, we had reporters there, and the people we spoke to, some of them very moderate views, are really concerned that the country is sliding into an autocracy for different reasons. And then you have Speaker Johnson and other Republicans. I had Republican McLean on earlier, who were criticizing them and saying that they're communists and that they're small and that they're even anti-Semitic. What do you make of the way Republicans are handling this?
Look, they're going to follow the lead of Donald Trump and be dismissive of that. I don't think the protests were un-American. Protesting is very American. But I do think that they sort of took their eye off the ball here. And I say that because it was a beautiful weekend in Washington, D.C., and New York and Philadelphia this weekend. And all of those are just across a river from states that have very close gubernatorial races. And if I'm a Democrat, I want those people on one of those final Saturdays going into a campaign, not at a protest. I want them knocking on doors and making phone calls in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, in Union and Bergen County, New Jersey, certainly Northern Virginia. And by having them at a protest, when you're coming down to crunch time in a campaign, seems to me to take your eye off the ball. What I'd do instead is try and win those races as much as you can, have those volunteers on the ground, do your protest after those elections. If you're successful, then you can talk about the momentum. You can say, look, we've just won these races and all these people are fighting on the ground for us now. I think there's a real missed opportunity.
That's a great point, Doug. And it's not, and even if you take it out of New Jersey and Virginia where you've got governor's races, I think a refrain for many people is, okay, what now? You got 7 million people, what now? Did you collect everybody's emails and you're going to raise funds from them? Like, are you going to set up a phone chain and have them volunteering in 2028? What now? And yes, the energy and the activism and enthusiasm, like you said, it's American and it's wonderful, but if people really care, even if it's not about those two races, like what? Like today, like literally today on Monday, what, like, are people just still cleaning up the signs they made, or like what's next?
It's a fair point. I wonder what you think, Mo.
No, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. Just make sure you're walking and chewing gum. I don't disagree with that, right? 7 million people around the country, many of whom are not close to New Jersey, not close to Virginia, desperate for an outlet to show their disapproval with this president and his policies and his actions. The fact that they came together was fantastic. Now, what do you do with that energy moving forward is a key question. I also think that the president keeps giving them a reason to mobilize, not just with his actions, but we all remember, it wasn't that long ago, that the Republican Party ran an entire campaign against Hillary Clinton for using the word deplorables to describe some Trump voters. And politically, that was a smart thing for them to do. This president and this speaker and their allies are saying anyone who disapproves, anyone that showed up, and we all saw a lot of those protesters, little old ladies standing on street corners waving signs, are un-American and deserve to have excrement dropped on their heads, as the president showed in that AI video, right? If Democrats can actually use that to harness some of the same energy that Republicans did back in 2016, they just have to do it. They just have to figure out how to organize and mobilize these people.